Okay, we are connected.
Very good. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dave Anderson, and I serve as chair of the Master's Level Psychology Licensed Clinical Psychotherapy Advisory Committee of the Kansas Behavioral Science Regulatory Board. I ask the members of the advisory committee to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that is being conducted remotely by conference call and other electronic medium. David Stevens is out. Ginger Hill.
Here.
Rebecca Jabara.
Everybody.
Bruce Johnson. I don't see Bruce. Lauren Luck.
Present.
Sarah McMillan.
Present.
Iris Polly is gone. Robert Pedroza.
Present.
Jennifer Schreiner.
Here.
Josh Tanguay.
Here.
And I believe Kari Wold is absent today. I note the following BSRB staff are also present: David Fye.
Here.
Leslie Allen.
Here.
Next,
David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
thank you, Dave. This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about its concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or COMA, does not require the advisory committee to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the executive director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. Time has been approved at this meeting for a presentation on the American Psychological Association's accreditation of master's level psychology programs. Because we are conducting this public meeting remotely by conference call and other teleconference ability, I state for the record the following information. Public access to this meeting is conducted by a medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call and on the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of COMA are not suspended, and we will be conducting this meeting pursuant to the COMA. On June 28th, 2024, we sent notice of the advisory committee meeting to all individuals that requested notice of the advisory committee meeting. Notice was also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other media material have been posted on the board's website and are available for review. You may also request a copy of the agenda specifically by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and the YouTube channel that allows the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if we have any technical issues during the meeting, you may call the board office at 785-296-3240 or send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of this meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda. And Dave, before we got started, I did check the conference call phone line. There's no one currently on the line, but if I hear someone beep over, I will let you know.
Thank you, Dave. The meeting is now called to order, and the advisory committee will begin its discussion of the first item on the agenda. So, first of all, my apologies to you all for having to push this meeting back an hour. Got myself double booked, and I appreciate the flexibility that you all demonstrated in being able to meet too. Also, welcome to Dr. Mann. Appreciate your making time for us as well. So next on our agenda is the approval of the agenda or addition to the agenda. Are there any additions to our agenda? Okay, seeing none, I would accept a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor of the motion, please say aye. A show of hands is fine. Any opposed, same sign. Very good. Agenda is approved. We'd like to take a moment to welcome our new advisory committee members, offer you the opportunity, Ginger and Sarah, to introduce yourselves to the advisory committee, and then we'll go around and take a moment to introduce ourselves to you.
Go for it, Sarah.
I'm Sarah. I practice in Salina. I have a small group practice here. We mainly do trauma focused. We work with all ages. I do a lot of child trauma focused therapy. And then we also are one of the only VA community care centers in our town too. So excited to be here.
I'm Ginger Hill. I'm clinical director for 4 County Mental Health Center in Independence, Kansas. Been doing this work for about 26 years.
Welcome, Ginger. We'll go around the room and we'll start with Josh.
Oh, man. Hello, Sarah and Ginger. Welcome. My name is Josh Tangway. I reside in Plainville, just north of Hays, Kansas. Been practicing for 12 years. Manage a team of about 10 therapists at a private practice out here in Hays, and have been involved with Fort Hays State University with actually Dr. Mann for a number of years as well.
Nice to meet you.
Lauren?
I like this. This is fun. You never know when you're up. I'm Lauren. I am the Vice President of Mental and Behavioral Health for the University of Kansas Health System. I'm also a faculty member at KU Medical Center in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences, and have been practicing since about 2006. Welcome.
Thank you.
Robert?
Hello, I'm Robert Pedroza. I'm in Roland Park, so just outside of Kansas City. I'm with Centurion, so I've been working on the correctional side of healthcare for 10 years as of this fall, so as of next month. So, yeah, a little bit about me.
Jennifer?
Hi, Ginger and Sarah. I'm Jennifer Schreiner. I'm the clinical director with Horizons Mental Health Center here in Hutch. So pretty close, Sarah. I have been practicing since 2008, so 16 years, all in community mental health. So that's where my heart is.
Rebecca?
Hi, I'm Rebecca, and am I the only one in Wichita? I didn't realize that. I think I might be. I'm in Wichita. I've got a couple of roles here. I work with the USD 259, the Wichita Public Schools, and I do their mental health evaluations. 2 of us to do for 49,000 children, and then I have a small private practice that I do just in my extra time for some extra income and extra fun, obviously.
Leslie?
Sorry. My name is Leslie Allen. I'm the Assistant Director and Licensing Manager for the BSRB. I have been with the board for 25 years now. I'm glad to meet you.
Thank you.
Dave?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to see you, and Ginger and Sarah, it's nice to see you in person. We've communicated over email. Really excited about your interest in serving on this committee. It's a really, really valuable committee for the board. Since we're a composite board, a lot of the discussions that relate to each of the individual professions occur at these types of meetings, and I find these particularly valuable. As someone who has an education outside of the profession, it's helpful for me to learn more about these fields, and it's really valuable for the board to get input from professionals in these areas, and then be able to make recommendations back to the board. So appreciate you both volunteering your time. It is really valuable, and look forward to working with you both more. If you do have any questions after the meeting, feel free to reach out to me directly. Just to let you know, we have an annual training for new board members and advisory committee members that takes place at these advisory committee meetings, and that'll be a normal part of the meeting coming up in October. So it'll be sort of a lengthy training, but really valuable training to talk about things like the Kansas Open Meeting Act, Kansas Open Records Act. Just one of the things that serving on a state agency subcommittee like this Essentially, you just have to be mindful that if you have back and forth communication with members of the committee, when it involves the majority of members, that needs to take place at a public meeting like this. And there's some other rules like that, but that's one. If people aren't used to working in this type of format, they're used to just communicating back and forth to get work done outside of meetings. We just have to be careful about the process we follow. So that's one early kind of comment, but there'll be some more guidance like that at the next meeting. But if you ever have questions, feel free to reach out to me. You're also welcome to reach out to the chair of the advisory committee, David Anderson. And then Leslie is also a wonderful resource for the BSRB. She's been a big help to me in taking on this role as the executive director. So feel free to reach out to her too if you have questions related to licensure.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm Dave Anderson. I spent 36 years working in community mental health up in Northwest Kansas. I am now the commissioner for aging services for KDADS. I've been doing that for the past 6 months. Welcome. We appreciate the fact that you'll take time out of your day to work with us on what are very important issues, and appreciate the fact that you're both clinicians, and we look forward to hearing your specific points of views on the items that we're going to be talking about. We will move next to a presentation from Dr. Brooke Mann. Dr. Mann, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Is it okay if I share my screen? I have a really brief PowerPoint that I will email you both Davids after this meeting.
Yes, you should be able to share your screen.
Okay, let me pull that up. Thank you for inviting me to speak with you all today about APA accreditation. I'm Brooke Mann. I am the director of the clinical psychology program at Fort Hays, and I also serve as a consultant for the APA Master's accreditation. So I know you all have been having lots of conversations about accreditation and what that process looks like, and the licensing requirements in Kansas and education requirements. So I think it's great to have these conversations. Thank you for inviting me to share with you all a little bit about APA accreditation and what the process looks like. I thought that I would share with you all a little bit about the background of APA accreditation and how this process got started and how it's rolling along. I promise I won't spend a lot of time talking about that, but I also wanted to share some information about the accreditation timeline and the process and where APA is in that timeline and process right now. Program requirements, which I think will be especially applicable as you all are making considerations and determinations for education requirements for licensure, and then of course any questions. But if you have questions while I'm sharing information, if you want to unmute and shout them out, or I guess there's no chat. If you want to ask questions throughout the presentation, I think that's great as well. So APA started this process of exploring accrediting master's programs in 2018, and they have shared that the purposes for accrediting master's programs is recognizing there's an increased demand in the field of psychology, in the field for psychological services, and that accrediting master's programs would help lead to expanding access to mental health care and the importance of specifically the psychological services that can be and need to be provided. Why accrediting master's programs? APA has determined that it would help with quality assurance. All other helping professions have accrediting bodies that accredit their education that leads to licensure. So this quality assurance will lead to better protection of the public and better protection for students. It also hopefully will increase the number of psychological clinicians who are trained in the science of psychological practices and increase access to psychological services. The APA is pretty clear about their responsibilities and what are not their responsibilities in terms of they don't want to overstep jurisdiction of states and licensing agencies. So they see part of their responsibilities is overseeing the educational training and preparation of master's level psychologists, or they're calling them health service psychologists. So they have put out standards of accreditations for master's programs, implementation of regulations and operating procedures. However, they have determined that they will not put out a title of practitioner for students who graduate from APA accredited programs. The scope of practice and licensure eligibility. They feel that these processes lie in the hands of state regulatory boards to determine what is the title of that master's level practitioner, what is the scope of practice in terms of are they eligible for independent practice, or what levels of psychological assessment, and then also eligibility for licensure in different states. So the process for accreditation, sorry, let me kind of back up just a little bit. Like I said, they started this process in 2018 when the council had a motion to pursue the accreditation of what they're calling health service psychology master's level programs. This includes clinical psychology, counseling psychology, and school psychology under their broad umbrella of health service psychology. In 2019 was when they first developed their task force and developed the blueprint for accreditation. So in phase 1, they developed the procedures and regulations. These were vetted and approved by the Council of Accreditors and by APA, and there was a public comment period. In phase 2, they approved and finalized their operating procedures and implementation regulations. They also had a public comment period, and I know that at least in our area, several agencies, including Fort Hays, put out comments or responded to their public comment period. They're currently in what they are calling phase 3A. So in 2023, in 2023, they put out a call for programs to apply for accreditation through the initial process. 7 programs applied and went through that initial process in 2023. 5 of those programs have been accepted for either a site visit or are pending authorization for a site visit. They are planning on doing that this winter, and hopefully those programs will know next spring whether or not they have been accredited. After that, and as they are reviewing the accreditation process, they're in phase 3B, they will open it up for all programs to be able to apply for accreditation, for master's level accreditation. So I think they're probably still like a year-ish out before they open it up for everybody to apply for that. After they have it open for any program to apply, then they will submit their scope to recognition bodies. So they'll work closely with organizations such as the Association of State and Provincial Psychology Boards, to work closely with licensing boards and committees to make that bridge or that connection between accreditation and licensure. So a little bit about program requirements. Programs, of course, have to be clinical, counseling, or school psychology to apply for the master's degree. A lot of the requirements align closely with the current LMLP licensure requirements in that the program has to be at least 2 years in length and it's 60 credit hours. So there's a lot of overlap there. They have to have developed curriculum and training experience. The APA does not set requirements for master's level programs on the number of clinical hours like is required for the LMLP, but they do require there be training, clinical training. Programs must cover all discipline-specific knowledge areas and profession-wide competencies. These discipline-specific knowledge areas and profession-wide competencies are particularly of interest for licensing boards because they align or are related to those educational requirements. And then programs, of course, have to have data on current students and program graduates and how they met their competencies, but also things like licensure, credentialing, employment, things like that. So what I really wanted to chat with you all about was these discipline-specific knowledge areas and the profession-wide competencies. So for APA accreditation, every program must have data on how their students are competent or meet competencies in every area of these discipline-specific knowledge areas. I believe these align closely with the educational requirements, specifically category 3, the psychological foundation courses, and category 4, those professional core courses. One thing I want to note though is for APA accreditation, students don't have to have an entire course on each of these areas, but they do have to have competencies in each of these areas. So they may take an entire course on developmental aspects, for example, or they may cover affective aspects of behavior in a class like psychopathology. So students must demonstrate competency in each of these 8 areas, but that doesn't necessarily mean they have an entire course on each of these 8 areas. Also, competencies for APA can be demonstrated in ways outside of coursework. So for example, in research related to practice, that could be demonstrated by a thesis project or a capstone research project. Are there any questions about these discipline-specific knowledge areas? I can talk a little bit more about how APA defines each of them, or we can come back and chat about them. The other side of the competencies or educational requirements are what APA is calling the profession-wide competencies. So these areas are more closely related to practice, where they see discipline-specific knowledge areas being like the foundational psychological knowledge that everybody needs to have before we can really start building on these professional skills. So these profession-wide competencies, again, I think align with the educational requirements for the LMLP, specifically category 1 and 2 with those psychotherapy and testing categories, and then also the professional core courses in category 4. Some of these can be demonstrated by students' experiences in classes or specific courses. For example, especially things like assessment and intervention, but they could also be demonstrated by observed clinical training or supervisor interactions within that clinical training. So I know as you all are reviewing educational requirements and statutes and updating those education requirements for programs and also taking into consideration APA requirements, they're close to opening this up for all programs to be eligible to apply for APA accreditation. I thought now I would open things up for questions. Oh, Josh, did you have a question?
Yes. I assume it's pretty flexible, but do you get a sense of the leniency a program is allowed to say, well, they get that in their internship?
Yes. Yep. So there is a lot of flexibility for programs to say, yes, they will cover professional values, attitudes, and behaviors in their internship, but programs have to have a way to assess that while they're at their internship.
Documented and all that. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
Very good.
I get the sense that the APA is not doing this to gatekeep master's level clinical psychology that really they're trying to do their due diligence and quality assurance, but also to have like some strong credentialing when it comes to accreditation and maybe more representation for master's level folks.
How long does accreditation last for?
Oh, I should look. I think that it's 5 or 7 years before you have to.
A long time. That's great.
Yeah, I think I cleared the paper off my desk. I think it's 5 or 7.
They have guidelines. I'm sorry, I'm just hammering you with questions.
You're good. This is great.
Do they have guidelines on like the makeup of the faculty and how that all pans out?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's differences at the doctoral level and the master's level, where doctoral level have to have faculty who are doctoral level psychologists, clinical psychologists. At the master's level, there isn't that requirement, but they do have the core faculty requirement that is similar to the LMLP requirements, and that there has to be an identified core faculty. Another interesting component of APA, which is very different than other accrediting bodies, is there's not a student to faculty ratio that they have determined, as long as the faculty are an appropriate size to meet student needs.
That's awesome. And then, so the core faculty, is there a ratio of core faculty to adjunctive faculty or something like that? Or just identified core, saying these 3 people are core faculty?
Yep. And as long as they can, as long as programs can demonstrate or make the argument that that's appropriate to the size of their program.
Is there, I feel like I'm just grilling your brain. Is there any, do they have any discussion on virtually delivered programs versus residential programs?
They don't have requirements either way. So they call it, I can't remember their term for like online programs or distance. They may call it distance education. Programs meeting APA accreditation can be completely at a distance or completely on campus face-to-face, or any mix of the two.
Fantastic. Thanks, Bert.
Yeah.
Brooke, does that that includes the kind of practice courses like testing or psychotherapy?
It does. They do have a requirement that faculty must observe intervention. I can't remember, again, sorry, I should know this. I can't remember the way they specifically phrase it, but there has to be some direct observation of faculty on clinical skills. However, that could be done by video. So in terms of assessment courses being completed face-to-face or therapy being face-to-face, that is not a requirement, as long as there is oversight of some of that clinical training.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Do you know, is that different for the doctoral level programs? Like you said, that there were certain things that were not the same as doctoral. Would that in person be different than the doctoral programs that are accredited?
I am not as familiar with the APA doctoral level accreditation standards, but I do think that they have to have, they have to be face-to-face or have some face-to-face components at the doctoral level.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Other questions?
Is there any room, Brooke, for I know this is something you and I have talked about pertinent to Fort Hays, but like undergraduate credits counting towards?
Yes, I'm sorry, I should have mentioned that. So for the discipline specific knowledge areas, undergraduate courses can meet the requirements of 1 through 5.
Undergraduate courses.
Yes. However, programs would have to still they would still be required of how they are demonstrating students have that competency.
Right, but you could do some sort of transitional program or something.
Right. And yeah, so you could accept like developmental psychology, social psychology, cognitive,
Sweet, go
from the undergraduate level.
APA. Good job.
Dr. Mann, I really appreciate you sharing this information. This is really helpful. Since we oversee 7 professions as a regulatory board, for some of the other professions, there has been historically a national accrediting body, and it has helped us in terms of helping people get through the licensure path, because if they receive their education from a nationally accredited program, you know, that accrediting body has done the checks for the coursework of the program or making sure those measurements are in place. And currently right now, there's only about 17 states that license master's level psychology, and not all those 17 states even refer to the same terminology in terms of using the term master's level psychology. I'm sure you're aware of all this. And so a lot of the work the advisory committee the last few years has been trying to find ways to modernize the requirements for licensure and the regulation. And it's exciting to hear about the APA accrediting programs. I think it is still, when you go over this material, it does still seem a little bit challenging moving away from what the APA looked at for doctoral programs in terms of coursework to competencies, and how as a licensing body we can have a good system to be able to evaluate those for programs that maybe don't seek accreditation. But I think these are definitely positive steps, and this is helpful to kind of hear it from your perspective, having looked at programs, and this is really helpful information, I think, for the advisory committee.
Great, thank you. Yeah, one thing we always keep in mind when we make any program requirements is going back to licensing requirements, and we never want to make a change that disadvantages students in Kansas. But yeah, looking at other states' requirements, it's difficult, and it's kind of, to me, it's very crazy that there is not an accrediting body, because of course we have to uphold the standards of the field, and we are meeting the requirements set forth by licensing bodies. But other than that, when we make our assessment plans, we're not really answering to anybody. So I think that quality assurance is a big piece to this, and it is important. I do have, like I said, I will send this to you so that way you can share it out. There are some links here to the APA accreditation website, and then there's standards for accreditation as well. And my email, if anybody has questions or would like to chat more about this or anything related to programming, I'm happy to answer questions or have any kind of conversations.
Dr. Brooke, one more question. As you have been looking at the programs that have applied thus far, and you compare it to the program you run here in Kansas, are you seeing any substantial differences or things that jump out at you, or feedback from the APA committee to these programs that's leading you in the direction of thinking about changes?
I think that it is always great to see what other programs do, because in a lot of ways it's a lot of information of what we can do to improve our own program, and some validation of what we do that works really well for our students in our program. I think that the licensing requirements, and again, that's kind of like our guiding light for our program curriculum, I think that they align pretty well. There could be some updates, as you all know. I think the licensing requirements align pretty well. But what I will say is that the programs that are going through the accreditation process right now are already attached to PhD programs that are APA accredited. So it's PhD APA accredited programs that are going through, and now they are accrediting their master's program. So they have a little bit of an advantage in that they already knew what the requirements are. They already have the student data readily available to them. But in terms of big big differences. I don't think I've seen anything that's really stuck out that is like, oh gosh, we don't do that, or we really need to update these things to meet those standards.
Very good, thank you. I know one of the things as we've been looking at educational requirements that's been lurking in the back of our minds is to not want to make any changes that would force university programs to have to change and then have this process come along and, you know, create some kind of an issue between what we're requiring and what they're asking for. So
Right.
it doesn't sound like, from what you've said, anything that currently exists in our licensure requirements would be at odds with what you see APA is wanting programs to be doing.
Right. And I would imagine you all know best the trends in the field and what is needed by early practitioners to be successful in the field. I can't imagine that there's anything that you all would propose that would be vastly different or not aligned with what they are also wanting. Thank you very much.
Questions? All right, seeing none, thank you very much, Dr. Mann. We appreciate your time today.
Oh, thank you.
And Dave, during the presentation, I did hear someone beep over on the conference call. If you're on the conference call and you'd like to introduce yourself, feel free to share your name. Okay, well, maybe they logged off, but if they come back, I will let you know.
Okay, very good. Thank you. That was helpful. I'm glad she was able to join us and provide that information. Next, we'll move to a review and approval of the minutes from our advisory committee meeting on June 12th. Does anyone have any additions or changes to the minutes? Hearing none, I would accept a motion.
So moved.
Thank you. How about a second?
I second.
Very good. We've got a motion and a second to approve our minutes. Any further discussion? All right, all in favor, please say aye, or you may raise your hand. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Thank you. We'll move to our executive director's report. Dave.
Thank you, Dave. So every advisory committee meeting, I tend to update the members of the advisory committee concerning operations of the BSRB, updates from the most recent board meeting, and then if there's any other items that stand out, like legislative updates, I provide a summary of those items. We do have a number of items on the agenda for this meeting, so I'll try to keep my report a little bit shorter than normal, but there are a couple of things I thought would be helpful for the advisory committee to know about. The first, under operations, we are getting closer to launching our work with a company called CE Broker. And for some of you that are new to the committee, just to kind of provide a little background, CE Broker is a company that works with licensing boards in Kansas, as well as in other states. Right now, they have agreements with the Board of Healing Arts and the Board of Nursing. And what CE Broker provides is a free service to the licensing board and also to the licensees. And so if you partner with CE Broker as a licensing board, your licensees will be able to sign up for a free account under CE Broker. And once they do that, you'll be able to upload documentation of completion of your continuing education hours. So if you attain your hours over the course of the 2 years, instead of holding on to that packet of material just in case you get audited, you can upload it to the portal and you can assign it in different categories like ethics, or if you are able to diagnose and treat, you can assign it in that category, or if it's just a general hour of CE, you can assign it in that as well. And then if you are selected for audit, instead of having to send stuff back and forth to the BSRB, we can go into the portal, verify that you have those already in CE Broker, and then we can approve the audit and it will go very quickly. And so there's a nice benefit to the licensing body for efficiency. There's a nice benefit to licensees for not having to just hold on to those documents and having a secure place to upload them. So it is optional, but we see a benefit from all sides. The way that company does make money is it offers other services at a charge, but no licensee is required to do that. Some voluntarily do choose to do that to get better access to other CE opportunities out there or some more hands-on service. But because enough people voluntarily choose to do that, they're able to offer it to all of the licensees for no cost. So happy to announce that that is getting closer to going live. I think sometime in the next month, we will send out a message to all licensees. The first profession they're going to be launching is going to be for professional counseling. After that, it will be social work, and then the other professions will follow along that timeline. So I will let you know when we get close to master's level psychology going live, but we've had some really productive conversations behind the scenes with representatives of that company, and we've been working out a lot of the logistical issues, and I think we're getting close to launching that. So keep an eye out for that sometime in the next month, at least for the beginning professions. Moving to the updates from the last board meeting. The board met on Monday, July 8th, and there is a new member of the board. So Denise Sisman is a new public board member for the board. Previously, Jackie Lightcap had held that position, and Jackie decided not to seek reappointment, so the governor did appoint Denise. Denise is going to serve as the public member for the behavior analyst as well as the addiction counseling advisory committees. Another update, we had kind of talked to most of the advisory committees a couple of meetings ago about a proposal on jurisprudence exams. Some states require that as a condition of licensure, or they require passage of that if you are coming in from out of state to make sure that you are aware of the laws in your state. There were some questions about should Kansas consider adopting a jurisprudence examination, and we explored some opportunities to do that. Some of the scenarios we saw that states have, which I'm sure are good scenarios, involve outsourcing that to private companies and charging a fee, or having more of a hands-on model that you would work through. But we didn't want to charge a fee to our licensees, and we wanted to take a different approach. So what we proposed was to have an alternative approach, bring something to the table that would be optional for licensees, that would be more of an interactive webinar, that we would be able to cover a lot of the same material, let people voluntarily choose to attend those meetings, and maybe try to host them quarterly for each profession so that people could sign up for them. And if they attend those and participate, they would be able to get an hour of continuing education credit. So that was proposed to each of the advisory committees. There was support for that. It was brought to the board. The board was supportive of that as well. So later on this fall, we're going to try to go ahead and launch that. We will probably need a little bit of assistance in terms of writing those questions and putting that all together, but I'm really excited about that. I think it could be a neat way to accomplish the goal of the board without involving any kind of additional requirements for licensure or any kind of additional fees. And I think it honestly could be kind of fun. Some learning can be fun if you approach it in certain ways. So looking forward to that. Another item from the last board meeting, the board every July holds an election for board chair and also board vice chair. Happy to announce that Dave Anderson has been elected as the board chair for this current year. And so we're working with Dave in that capacity. And then Laura Shaughnessy, the board member for professional counseling, has been elected as the vice chair for the board for the next year. So congratulations to both Dave and Laura. And as I said, we'll be working with them in that new role for each of them this year. There were also some appointments for new advisory committee members. Once a year, generally, we have individuals come up on the ends of their terms on advisory committees. As some of you that are new are aware, your term as an advisory committee member is 2 years, and you're appointed by the chair of the board, but the advisory committees themselves discuss applicants and make recommendations for new members. And so you are able to serve at most 8 years on the advisory committee. And so every spring, I look to see who's coming on the end of a 2-year term, see if those individuals wish to continue to serve on the advisory committees, and if they would like to be reappointed, then I contact the chair of the board and there can be reappointments. And then if there's new members, there can be new appointments to the advisory committees as well. So 4 of the advisory committees had appointments the last board meeting. The other 3 will be talking about new recommendations for members. So that's why we're having the big training in October at those meetings, so we can do that for each of the committees when they all have new members at that time. Additionally, another item the board talked about at the last board meeting had to do with the social work multi-state compact. That was a bill that passed the legislature this spring. So this is a brand new compact. Only one state had passed the model language last year. This year, Kansas was the 7th state to pass that. And according to the language in the compact, you need at least 7 states for the rules committee to start to meet, to start to flesh out the rules of the compact. So since we were number 7, that guaranteed that was going to happen. Since that time, I think there's been quite a few other states that have passed the compact. I think we're up to about 22 or 23 states right now. So that compact has been very popular. I expect even more to pass that throughout the end of the year or maybe next year. And so at that meeting, the board appointed me to serve as the initial commissioner for the state of Kansas for the social work compact. So I'll be attending those meetings on behalf of Kansas and trying to make sure that the rules have all the contingencies figured out and make sure that that can become operational as soon as possible. Based on the time frame that I've received from the Council for State Government, they've told me that they believe that compact, as far as a target go live date, is probably sometime late next year. And part of the reason for that is determining all the rules of the compact. Another thing is also working on a data system. So that compact would allow states to offer a multi-state license, which is a brand new thing states don't have the authority to do. But under the compact, you would now give states the ability to not only issue a license in the state where they live to practice social work, but as an alternative, they could issue a license to practice in the state you live and all their compact states. And so it's important for the public protection that there is a list somewhere the public can see as this person licensed in another state and they're practicing under multi-state authority. So that's why the data system is really important. So they're going to work on getting that all put together. But that is hopefully going to go live sometime late next year. The board also had a start of the conversation concerning use of alias information for licensees. We've had this discussion a little bit for individuals. If some individuals wanted to practice under a different name than a legal name, we've had to tell them that according to our standards, we have to have licensees practice under their legal names. But some individuals have said they would prefer for past names not to be public on the website and the verification portal if they didn't practice under those names. And that's not a scenario the board has really had a chance to review until recently. And so the board has asked legal counsel to review that information. If there's a name that someone practiced under, there's no statute of limitations on complaints. So it's important the public still has the ability to know the name of their practitioner or their provider. But if it was a name where they weren't practicing, we're looking into some of the legal aspects of that. The board will continue to have a conversation along those lines the next meeting. There's also a conversation the board started on advisory committee member expectations. There is a document on the website that the board adopted several years ago that's called an expectations for board members document. And it outlines sort of what the board is asked to hold themselves accountable in terms of conflicts of interest and, acting professional and things like that. In terms of the advisory committee, there is a policy for the advisory committee that's a very short policy. It's a little over 1 page. Most of that describes the role of the advisory committee in terms of making recommendations to the board and discussing items the board refers to it. But there is some language in that policy that says the same policies and procedures that affect the board should also affect the advisory committees. But that language has never really been fleshed out. For example, board members are compensated a small amount for attending approved meetings of the board or advisory committees. It's just $35 per day, regardless of how long those meetings take place. But advisory committee members are not entitled to the same amount. Their service is voluntary. So we know it's not a 1-for-1 match. But in terms of the expectations for advisory committee members, that has never been fully fleshed out. So there was some preliminary conversation as far as, should there be a limitation on the number of absences per year for advisory committee members? Should there be a distinction between approved or unapproved absences? Should there be a requirement that advisory committee members be licensees under the BSRB? That is usually the case, but that language does not appear. And then there also was a conversation about should licensees need to have a license or should they need to reside in Kansas? The statute for the board members does say that board members have to live in the state, but that language does not appear in the advisory committee policy. And about 1/3, sometimes 1/4 of our licensees do live outside of the state of Kansas. So These are good questions for the board to continue to have a conversation on. No recommendations were made at that meeting, but they will continue that discussion. In terms of some upcoming meetings I wanted to make you aware of, the board usually meets the second Monday of the month, every other month. So the next full board meeting would have normally been the second Monday of September. But every September, the board likes to hold an annual off-site planning meeting, and that gives the board an opportunity to come together in person and discuss items that require a little bit more review, and sometimes they can discuss items relevant to the legislative agenda if they want to request a bill. And so rather than hold a regular meeting at the beginning of the month and then that meeting at the end of the month, the board decided they would hold a brief meeting on the evening of Sunday, September 29th from 5:30 to 7:30, and that'll be in Lawrence, Kansas. And then the following day, on Monday, there will be the all-day planning meeting, which will also be in Lawrence, Kansas. And information on those two meetings will be posted on the website. It's up there right now. But basically, it's an open meeting to the public. The board likes to move that meeting around the state. 2 years ago, it was in Kansas City. Last year, it was in Wichita. This year, it'll be in Lawrence. And so it is open to the public, but that just gives the board an opportunity to come together in person and then work on those details. So that's coming up in September. The November board meeting, like I said, would normally be the second Monday of the month, but in November, that falls on Veterans Day. So some individuals may want to attend ceremonies that day, or maybe in offices that are closed that day. So what we decided to do was give the board an alternative date, and we pulled board members, and they decided to meet the first Monday of the month. So that meeting in November will be Monday, November 4th instead. And then I wanted to highlight two special meetings. These are meetings put on by BSRB staff. It's something we started to do last year. So these are not official meetings of the board, but they do help the board, and the information we collect from these meetings, we pass on to board members. These are informational briefings, and the first one is an informational briefing for educators around the state. Last year, we wanted to do something similar to a traditional roundtable discussion for educators. So what we did is we opened it up and tried to contact representatives from different programs for the professions that regulate the same professions we regulate in the state. And we reached out to representatives from the schools, and we made about a 1-hour presentation on recent changes in statute since about 2021 through 2023 at the time. And then we opened it up for questions, and then received some feedback from educators concerning any kind of proposals for changes that the legislature could consider, or any kind of feedback. So that was well received. So this year we will be doing that again. It'll be a virtual meeting to allow more attendees. Last year we had about 40 attendees for both meetings. And so that one for educators will be on Thursday, September 19th at 1 p.m. And I'll be reaching out to schools and trying to get availability for any individuals who want to attend that meeting. But that'll be on Thursday, September 19th at 1 p.m. And that'll be for educators at the schools around the state. The following day, we will hold a similar informational forum for employers. And that'll give them the opportunity to get some updates from the BSRB. These are mental health employers. And so this is the first time we tried to do this. Last year. We tried to reach out to contacts from a lot of those employers and invite them to attend this virtual meeting. And so we will be holding that this year on September 20th. So basically the following day, it'll be on Friday, September 20th at 1 p.m. And like I said, we'll be contacting individuals. We'll post more information about this, but we'll probably just go ahead and do those over Zoom and record them. And then if there's no issues, we'll go ahead and upload them to the BSRB YouTube channel afterwards. So, I thought those would be some helpful dates and good information for you. So at that point, I will go ahead and end my report and see if there's any questions.
Thank you, Dave. Questions for Dave on his report? All right. That moves us to old business. And if I remember correctly, Dave, you wanted to make sure we had time to cover the issues in new business as well.
Yeah. Yes, that's true. So we could move out of order. There's a note on our agenda that lets us take items however we'd like to do so. So if you want, we can go ahead and consider those items in our new business first, and then move to the old business items.
All right, let's do that.
Okay. So in your packet of material, you have some documents, and I'll go ahead and highlight some towards the end of your packet of material concerning the Association of State and Provincial Psychology Boards, ASPPB, and also a proposed bylaw amendment by some representatives from Texas. And so just to kind of frame this discussion, so as a state regulatory board, especially as a composite board, we have the opportunity to work with different associations at the national level. Sometimes these entities are formed to assist regulatory boards in terms of standardized processes, providing guidance. In the case of ASPPB, that is an association that assists state licensing boards for the profession of psychology. And one of the major things they do is they create and administer the EPPP, the licensing examination for psychology. And so before my time, I have heard there were other states that had an oral exam as part of the requirements for licensure. And part of this was to assess individuals' abilities and competencies before they were able to practice. One of the issues historically with an oral exam has been the subjectivity of that type of exam. And so several years ago, ASPPB was asked to look into an alternative to that. And their response to that was the development of something called the EPPP2. ASPPB basically would describe the EPPP, the current license examination, as more of a knowledge-based test. And that is something that states that license in psychology, we use as our tool in Kansas to show some of the competency to be able to practice psychology. For the licensed psychology or PhD level psychology, they must pass that test at a 500 level. For our master's level profession, LMLPs or licensed master's level psychologists have to pass that at the 400 level. But if they would like to move on and become clinical practitioners, they need to pass that at the 500 level, plus meet other requirements. So essentially what ASPPB has done has created this EPPP2 as a skills-based assessment. And they made this available to states a few years back as something that states could voluntarily adopt as a requirement for licensure along with the EPPP. A few states have done that, but not a lot of states have done that. ASPPB a few years back was proposing making both tests a requirement for licensure, and there was some concern from states that would be not something that the states wanted to pursue at that time. And so ASPPB said, okay, we will pull back that recommendation and we will research this more and we will reconsider that at some point in the future. And so that leads to the first document, which was put out in October 28th, 2022. And that was basically something that the board of ASPPB put out saying that they had reconsidered the EPPP2 and that they had decided that they saw value in requiring the EPPP2 and they would like to require both parts of the test, the EPPP and now the EPPP2. And in that document, it says versus having two different tests, they would now see them as one test with two parts. And so you would still be required to pass the EPPP, which would now be called part 1, and then the EPPP part 2. And for any states that didn't voluntarily move to that model, what they said is that effective January 1st of 2026, any states that wish to use any part of the EPPP for licensing purposes would have to require both parts. Now, this was not put to the body of the members for states to vote on to say, we agree with this or we don't. It was something that was determined by the board of ASPPB, and then it was just released. And so, like I said, we didn't have the opportunity to express whether we wanted to vote in favor of this or not. I did meet with some people from ASPPB to express some concern about how this was handled, and but there really didn't seem to be much of a choice. It was not put to a vote of the members of the board. There has been some concern by some of the states since that point about whether or not to require both parts of the test. The second document you have is from June 17th. This is another document from ASPPB. It does reaffirm that they want to go ahead and make that a requirement for all states as of January 1st of 2026. It does reaffirm that they would be considered two parts of the same test. But there could be an additional option for a single fee and 2-day administration of the test versus the original model, which was to take the first part and then wait a period of time and then take the second part. So I think they had some, they were trying to respond to some feedback from states that had expressed concern about the two different parts and that they may not be able to adjust their rules, or they may have some difficulty actually requiring both parts of the test. And as an alternative to not using a licensing test at all, they were trying to accommodate that concern. However, there are some states that still have expressed concern. And so those are the two different documents you have at the back of your packet. So you have the last page has some language from the Texas Board of Psychology and the Texas State Board of Examiners in Psychology. And they are going to be proposing a bylaw amendment to ASPPB. And I'll get into the language of that proposed bylaw amendment. But essentially, their effort is to pass this to make it optional for states to be able to require the EPPP2 if they would like to. But if they don't want to do that, they would not be required to do that as of January 1st, 2026. So the language of their bylaw amendment says, no member jurisdiction shall be required, whether as a condition of membership or otherwise, to participate or utilize any service or programs offered by the association. The association shall not make access or availability of a service or program contingent on a member jurisdiction participating or utilizing another service or program. Under D, it says the association may offer multiple exams as part of its examination program. At a minimum, the association shall offer a knowledge-based exam separate from any skills-based exam. Each exam offered by the association must be administered on a single occasion. For purposes of this subsection, multiple consecutive days of exam administration may constitute a single occasion. For each exam, the association may recommend but shall not require qualification to sit for an exam, timing for administration of an exam, and passing scores. So that is the language that is being proposed. So the annual meeting of ASPPB is occurring later on this year. And what I wanted to do, I brought this to the board at the last board meeting, but we thought this would be a good topic for both the licensed psychology and the master's psychology advisory committee to be aware of, and maybe provide a recommendation back to the board if you would like me on behalf of the state of Kansas to take a position either in favor or against the proposed bylaw amendment. I can tell you we have reached out to contacts from ASPPB to see if they could attend one of our advisory committees to provide a little bit of information on the background of the EPPP and the EPPP2 and maybe some of their reasons why they believe it would be helpful to require both tests. They are going to be able to attend the Licensed Psychology Advisory Committee meeting, and that is coming up next week on Tuesday. And so one of the representatives from ASPPB will be attending that meeting. But they were not able to attend this one, but I wanted to make you aware of this information, kind of trying to frame this historically, let you know about this bylaw amendment, and then see if you had any questions. You do have one additional page that basically explains the language from Texas, from their position, and it talks a little bit about some of their conversations with ASPPB and some alternatives they attempted to pursue, and then why they have concern with the existing scenario and why they're proposing the bylaw amendment. So maybe I'll just go ahead and pause here. I know for some of you, if you haven't been tracking this conversation, this is probably a lot of new information, but this is a good opportunity for us to have these conversations and for you to provide input if you have any thoughts. So if you have any questions or any thoughts on this topic?
Okay, I feel like I'm missing something. Like I feel like, and maybe it was in the documents and I just skimmed too quickly through parts of it, but what the skills, the part 2 of skills, I feel like originally it was like an interview, or it was a face-to-face, right? In person. Do we like, what would that look like? Do we have this, we'd have to have a staff for that? Like, I guess I'm confused on what part 2 of skills. I mean, we all know what part 1 looks like, but is that was that written out somewhere that I just missed?
I am unsure about that. I know part two was meant to replace the traditional oral exam, which would be the in-person component, and it's like what you described.
Okay, so then so Kansas would need staff everywhere for that, or like everyone would have to go to Topeka for that, or like how like practicality that like I just don't even do we
Yeah,
have a
good
budget for
question.
that? Like it just seems like so many extra additional parts.
Good question. No, I think the traditional oral exam did involve individuals administering that, like you kind of said, as far as the format. My understanding is the EPPP2 is still a written type test, and so you'll be able to take that at testing centers. So it would be different. So it would we hope to accomplish the same goal. I think of if the first part is really seen as a knowledge-based test, this would be seen as more of a skills-based test. But in terms of people passing both tests, there would both be a written test that you would be able to take at a testing center.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
I'm still unclear on the part two, so forgive me, but if they pass part one, and they fail part two, do they have to retake both, or do they have to then take the part two like within so long? I mean, I know like if they failed, like, the first part, they have to pay for it all again. How does that look like? So, does anybody know?
I believe so. So for anybody who's already passed the first, and some of this is, there has not been clear guidance from the beginning in terms of people who have taken the test many years ago, except that they have said that the desire on this is not to make people who passed the EPPP go back and now have to pass a new test to be able to practice. This will be something just starting as of January 1st of 2026. But as I understand it, if you pass the first part, there would be no time frame where you'd have to go back and pass that again. Once you had passed that, you were good. And then after that point, you could pass part two. If you were to fail part two, you would just need to retake part two.
Do we know if there's extra cost now because of this second part? Because it's already pretty expensive.
Yes. And I believe the cost is, I believe the EPPP last I looked was 600 maybe. And I think the EPPP2, at least the last that I saw, I was around 450.
Wow.
So I feel like this is a question, maybe I'm not the only one thinking it. Is this just a moneymaker for for them? I mean, they're like, hey, let's add an additional test and make more money, or is there value in this? Or is that what we're supposed to decide?
Well, yeah, and I know this is a lot to kind of bring to you all at once. From what I have picked up from the conversations and the presentation, they have compared the profession of psychology to other professions that have multiple competencies that are being assessed, and only having a skills component. I think they would say that it is deficient unless you have, if you only have the knowledge base but not the skill base, it's not on par with some of those other professions. Um, as a composite board, it's tricky for us because we have 7 professions, and at least for the 7 professions we oversee, they only require passage of 1 test per level of license. So we don't experience that with the other professions, but I don't know that I could speak to that with some of, let's say, the medical professions and how many different things they would have to pass. I know some of the professions also have 1 test that is split into different parts. For example, I'm an attorney and I passed the bar exam, and there's 1 section of that that is all day multiple choice, and then the next day it's all day essay. So it is 1 test spread across multiple days. There is 1 price that you pay for that versus this where there'd be 2 separate costs. But I think that's part of the reason for that second document from ASPPB that said to address some of the concern, they could perhaps do this all together with 1 fee. But that's kind of a discussion point. That's a very valid question.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to be having to ask that. I hate to even have to bring that up or ask it, but I mean, is this just a, yeah, one fee, but one much higher fee? Like, most of us that are in this field, we don't do it because we're making lots of money. So I just feel like I don't know. I want to be careful with people who want to get into the field, but they can't afford the testing, but um I'm not against it. I just feel like I want to be careful that we think it's a good thing for the profession and not just for, ASPBB to make more money, or I don't know. I just feel like it's an angle we need to make sure that that's not what's happening if we decide that it's a good idea. I don't know. Sorry, that feels really negative.
And I think that we need to keep our standards high for our master's level folks. But on the other hand, I meet so many students in the master's level program that they hear about the EPPP early on and they have such anxiety about having to take this. And I worry that then they find out, oh, well, now it's, a 2-section test. So now my anxiety goes way higher. Why don't I just go be a social worker instead? Their test is way cheaper and I don't have to take this huge national exam now. So I worry about the straying of people in our field.
I like in the stuff from Texas how it talks about the pass rates. Do we know, there already are people who are taking both part 1 and part 2. Do we know what the pass rates are for those that have done both? Like, is there, out of the 75% that have passed the first part of those, 50% have only passed both parts? I mean, I'm just curious, like, what the breakdown looks like.
That's a good question, and I don't recall. I know that the part 2 is relatively new, but I could look into that. But I'm not sure that I could really comment on that. I know there are some people who have passed part 1 that have not passed part 2, or at least didn't pass on their first attempt. So,
and is there, since it's written, is there, I don't know, exceptions given for those that, English is not their first language, or they struggle with English, or, I mean, I don't know that much about part 2. So for me to, fully understand like how this would affect people who are pursuing license, not everybody writes well. So, I mean, is that going to be a ding on them when they go to the part 2? I'm just curious.
and I know Leslie works with more applicants in terms of requests for accommodations, but I feel like that's probably where that would fit. And Leslie, for ASPPB, do we make that determination, or does the association make those determinations?
They don't have any accommodations for English as a second language. Other professions have their testing people do, but ASPPB doesn't. It's given in English and French, and there's no special. Unless maybe Dave, did you say they would allow it if someone had special accommodations in school because they had English as a second language?
I think that there are some sort of under a disability type category. If someone was allowed more time in school, if they could kind of show that documentation, there are some scenarios, but I don't think it may not be purely for having someone if English is not their first language.
Yeah. So now they're proposing that they do the test right close together is what, because originally when they did the EPPP2, when we started hearing about it, it was supposed to be like a practice exam. So you took EPPP part 1 in school, and then after you apply and do your year of practice, then you would take the EPPP2. And so now if they're putting them closer together, I don't understand how the clinicians are supposed to have these skills already if they haven't practiced.
Well, and we've talked a little bit with ASPPB about, like I said, only 17 states license master's level psychology. So I think a lot of the conversation was really focused on the PhD level applicant. But since we do require passage of the EPPP for master's level psychology licenses, we have asked them, wanting to continue to use this for master's level psychologists. what would be the requirement. And from what we understand, this would be a requirement not only for the PhD level, but also for master's level psychology applicants. They would be required to pass both part 1 and part 2. I can't say for sure what the pass point would be. I would assume there would be a lower pass point since we use a lower pass point for the EPPP for the master's level psychology. So I would think there'd be a lower pass point for both tests for masters, but don't really have a firm idea of what that would be right now.
Would we have the ability to access like a practice test to see what it would look like? Is that,
There's
or
actually one online.
is there?
Yeah. For example, here's a EPPP Part 2 question. In the first session with a client diagnosed with schizophrenia, the psychologist should A, display empathy, convey expertise, and express optimism that therapy can be helpful. B, identify poor coping mechanisms, set goals, and discuss medication adherence. Or C, help the client identify triggers, thoughts, and behavioral responses associated with psychotic symptoms.
And I probably should.
I just Googled it.
If you go to the
EPPP.
If you go to the AATBS, it's an organization that do a lot of testing materials, AATBS. You can actually get a little, I'm trying to get through it right now, but you can get a little sample exam. They do a lot of prep stuff. They actually break down the exam components too, and I'm pretty sure they're probably correct. It's a pretty reputable company, and I just panned off of that page, I think. So they break down like the areas of the EPPP2 and the types of questions that are on there. So I can send that link to David Fye or something, but it's a pretty good overview. My concern with it, just real fast, is like if they want, I think we should cut down on the EPPP1 and just add some of this stuff in and make it one test and not increase the price. I'm concerned with the price things too. I think some of this stuff is probably more important than some of the stuff on the EPPP1, which is relatively useless in a lot of ways and just regurgitating information you never use in practice. And this seems a little bit more applied, which is great. But I'm wondering if, I mean, they're not going to do this, and that's fine. We got to make a decision. But it would have been nice if they would have blended these two. There seems to be valuable information on both, but making it 2, and then if someone fails an attempt, it's another $1,000. I mean, that's just not feasible for a lot of people. So.
Well, it's kind of frustrating. I agree with you on combining the two. I think that would be smart, and I think that's a really great idea. But I feel like, the skills part, like I think our profession is misunderstood that we can treat and know all the mental health disorders. I don't work with clients with schizophrenia. So if I had someone who said, I want an appointment, I've got this disorder, I would refer them out as I should, because I don't work with that clientele. That's not my forte. So I feel like if you go to your general practitioner or doctor, you don't expect them to perform surgery, right? They refer you out. So I'm curious as to if the skills test is going to require the knowledge and skills based on all the areas. I heard, some of us work with trauma, some of us work with kids, some of us work with, but we don't all do all of the things. So, I don't know. It's another question, but I do like your idea about combining the two. I think that would make it a little bit better, maybe. I don't know. But it's hard to have the skills for all areas and every mental disorder, Maybe that's just me.
I mean, on the original EPPP, there's a whole section on IO that we have to know, and most of us will never do IO stuff. I didn't even have a class in IO. I just had to learn
Right.
As many of us probably did. So, there's always going to be stuff that we just don't need to know. But I'm fine with having a longer test. I mean, that's okay if you want to add 100 questions or 50 questions on the test or whatever. But having 2 exams and all that, I think would be a real turnoff for a lot of students.
Yeah. And it sounds like, David, the practice ones that you're seeing are multiple choice. So they would both be a multiple choice exam. So it's not like one's essay or one's. any different than the other, maybe, and as far as format?
Yeah, I don't know all that. Robert, it looked like you were trying to jump in there.
Oh, no, I would yield to her question.
It looks like there is some different types, like there is a section where you do drag and drop, like you put things in order and you have to pull them from one section and then put them in order on another. I agree. I'm uncomfortable always with a group that both says this is what you need to do, and we're the ones who, are establishing the test and what it costs to take the test and deciding who needs to do that. That's always plus, to Josh's earlier point, they're making money off selling study guides and other kinds of programs. So I'm a little always kind of concerned about that. But I think, Dave, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that statute requires that we have an exam, and it's not like there are a lot of exams. And I think Texas even said, we might just do our own and just skip this if it keeps getting more and more burdensome. Because I think everybody is concerned about the balance between, to Ginger's point, is setting a high bar, but not making it so high that nobody wants to come into the field or could get licensed. That's not helpful either. How about Sarah? You got some feedback for us?
I was just thinking about, I don't think these two are necessarily related at this moment, but when we're talking about the accreditation of the master's level, and then the compacts like the social workers going through at some point, then if more states are adopting the master's level psychologist degree, and if most of them have that, would not having that then make a difference? Because I know like California has such a difficult reciprocity with a lot of, especially like with their MFT licensure, and they make it a real pain either to go in or go out. I was just curious, like if Texas does develop their own, or we say we're not going to do it, we might do something different. Will that hurt later on? People either coming in or people transferring a license out?
Great question. And also, would it hurt with APA accreditation, right?
Yeah.
That's something that probably linked, and they would probably
Gotta play the game.
Well, my understanding of what Dr. Mann said, though, is APA is just looking at the educational programming, not the licensing requirements. They see those as kind of two separate pieces. Is that right, Dave?
I think so. I mean, the accreditation of master's level programs is still pretty new. So, but yeah, this is something that I really appreciate all your conversation about this today, because I try to attend these meetings on behalf of the board and bring information back to the board. And when this was initially announced, I did bring this back, but there did not really seem to be much of an opportunity to take action because, like I said, it really wasn't put to a vote. And as someone who does not have a background in education for psychology, I've never taken the ECCC, so I can't really talk from a knowledge standpoint as far as some of these merits, but that's why you all are so important in this conversation. And since the board has these standing advisory committees for this type of conversation, it's really valuable to get your thoughts on all these things. And I know some of it can feel a little uncomfortable to kind of ask questions about or talk about, but I really appreciate you bringing that up because whatever the board would recommend, I'm happy to bring to the annual meeting on behalf of Kansas and bring forward. And one thing that I do at least like about this bylaw proposed amendment is that it does give an opportunity to have a choice. And so just kind of wanted to bring that to you and let you discuss this today. If you feel like you're ready to make a recommendation back to the board, you could do that today. I think one of the tricky things is the next time the board will meet will be at the end of September. And then I believe the ASPPB annual meeting is at the end of October. So generally the way that recommendations work is the advisory committees discuss something, forward it to the board. The board really provides direction to me or to take official action on some of these things. So there may not be another opportunity to, unless you have a special meeting to kind of discuss things. But I also know that some of you, I've been hearing pieces about this and I've been trying to collect information on it, but it is a lot to ask all of you just to step into this today and have a conversation about it. But I thought I would see if any of you would like to make a recommendation and that we can forward to the board if you're ready to do that at this time, or if you have thoughts as far as that goes.
So just to clarify, Dave, at this point, the recommendation is simply on the bylaw amendment that's being put forth by the state of Texas's association about saying states should have the opportunity to stay with just using the first section of the EPPP and not be required to do the second the EPPP Part 2 at this time.
Right. Yeah, the language of the bylaw amendment is a little bit more broad, and it kind of gets into, not requiring member states to have to pursue certain programs or but I think at the essence of the bylaw amendment, what it is accomplishing is that it would allow states that optionally choose to require the EPPP2, they could still do that. But for the states that do not want to require that, they would not have to require that as of the January 1st deadline. So that's really what the bylaw is hoping to, the proposed bylaw amendment is hoping to achieve. So the recommendation could be, do you want Kansas to be supportive of this bylaw amendment at ASPPB's annual meeting or not?
And I certainly do support that because I think it gives us the opportunity to wait and see, as has been mentioned by a number of people, to see, well, does it pan out to be helpful for those who choose to do it? Or does it just increase the amount of money people have to pay without any increase in outcomes? Or is it make it harder for people to get licensed and thus reduce the number of people available? That would be my particular stance at this point. Other people?
I'm in support of that, Dave. I support what the Texas is trying to do. I just pulled up an article. I know this is from 2023, but it said that the EPPP2 has not been subjected to a validation process to see whether it is actually evaluating applicants' clinical skills. And that was done in an article from University of North Texas. So I'm in support of the proposal for the bylaw.
How about everybody else?
I am too.
Okay. Albert, thank you.
Agreed.
Agree.
Agreed.
All right. Well, there you go, Dave.
Okay, great. Well, there's consensus to go ahead and bring that back as a recommendation to the board. The Master's Level Psychology Advisory Committee is supportive of the proposed bylaw amendment from Texas. So we'll include that in the notes from the meeting, and I'll bring it back to the board to make sure they're aware of the advisory committee's position on that bylaw amendment. Thank you for your discussion on that. Really, really good comments and really good questions. I appreciate all that.
Do we want to do the second item under new business?
Okay, so as I mentioned, the board is going to meet at the end of November to hold an all-day planning meeting. The board attempts to get all board members together at least once a year to kind of flesh out some of the topics that involve a lot of discussion and perhaps some of the items that the board could request in terms of statutory changes. We're a state agency, and so our primary area that gives us guidance is the statute or the law. And then beneath that, we can make changes to regulations as we flesh out the details of the law. But if there are things that would involve a statutory change, then the board can request legislation in a given year. And so if there's any items the advisory committee would like to discuss as far as a proposed change to the law, that is something that you could make as a recommendation from the advisory committee. And then that could be provided to the board. And if the board is supportive of that, and that is something that can go into a bill that the agency would request in the spring.
Dave, for people kind of new to this process, do you want to give a couple of examples of what BSRB, excuse me, has done in this regard in the past?
Sure. So here's some examples. So for a lot of the professions, there is a statute that talks about the pathway to licensure through reciprocity. And when we say that, we talk about someone being licensed in another state or jurisdiction, and then at a certain point, they would like to become licensed in Kansas. And so most of the professions have a statute that says one of the requirements is that you need to either have come from a state that has substantially equivalent license requirements, or you need to have practiced for a certain length of time. And one of the items that the board really looked at a couple of years ago was the length of time in that statute. And so it said someone had to practice 48 of the past 54 months. So basically 4 years in that state before applying and coming over through that reciprocity. And we had a bill that passed the year before that essentially shortened that time frame for military members, military spouses, people that were moving to Kansas or intending to move to Kansas, dropping that down to 12 months. So one of the big changes the board recommended 2 years ago was a statutory change for all those professions to drop the length of time from 4 years down to 12 months. And you just had to hold a license in another jurisdiction for 12 months with a similar scope of practice. And then as long as you meet the other requirements, you would be able to get a license in Kansas through reciprocity. And I think Leslie could comment on how effective that has been, but I think it's allowed a lot more people to come in to get licensed in Kansas more quickly, especially. So that has been something to address concerns about workforce and other things like that. There's more technical changes sometimes. Sometimes we look through the statutes and we see that most of the professions require as a condition of licensure that someone merit the public trust. But for many years, the psychology profession said they had to have good moral character. Well, between those two standards, merit the public trust is more widely accepted, more legally defensible. So we asked for that to be changed in the statute, and that was changed. Another example is right now in statute, it lists the different professions that serve on the board, and it lists 8 professional members, and it outlines 2 psychologists, 2 social workers, et cetera, et cetera. It also says 4 public members. It does not list a behavior analyst as a board member, but that profession was added under the board's jurisdiction back in 2014. And currently right now we have behavior analysts and assistant behavior analysts, but there is not a member of the board specifically for behavior analysis. So a couple of years ago, one of the recommendations of the statutory change was to add a 13th board member for the behavior analyst profession. Now it went through the process, that item was taken out, so that did not pass. And so that's why we have 12 board members today, but those are some examples. Sometimes it can affect requirements for licensure in the statute. Sometimes it can affect the composition of the board, or it can affect maybe items such as continuing education requirements if they are in the statute itself. So hopefully that's helpful. There's a lot of statutes. There's a practice act for each of the 7 professions, and then there's the statute unique to the board itself. There's a lot of territory there. In some areas, we can make changes without going through that statutory process, but in other instances, we do have to request a bill before the legislature.
Thank you, Dave. Any questions in regard to that?
Also, Leslie and I go through the statutes and regulations from time to time, and if there are issues, we do try to spotlight them for the board and for committees so that you can on those. And we brought quite a few of them to the board a couple of years ago. So right now we're our primary focus has been on the regulations to try to sync those up with some of the statutory changes. But Leslie, do you have any kind of comment in terms of statutory changes?
I do have one. I have a, well, and if maybe Dave Anderson, if you could, if you remember back, do you know why an LMLP is, their education does not, there's an allowance if they didn't have a practicum, they can do 1,500 post-grad hours? And
No.
from what I've seen, and if we're going toward APA accreditation, if that's, you know, what we're looking at, the people that have applied from programs who did not intend to teach to licensure don't have a practicum. And the ones that are teaching toward licensure have practicum. And it just, it occurred to me while I was listening to her that your statutes and regulations, there are requirements for a practicum, but if they didn't have that, they can still get a license. And I just thought that was different, and I would bring it to your attention.
Do you think, Leslie, that's people who wanted to get licensed at the master's level while they were working on a PhD level?
Perhaps.
And so the practicum kind of experience maybe was going to be later in their educational process. And I have a vague, very vague memory of something like that.
I just wondered if it wouldn't be not to take away the allowance for the post-grad if a practicum didn't meet, but there should be some kind of practicum if you're training people to do therapy and assessments. That's, you know, it just seems odd that yours doesn't require it. That's
And as go ahead, Sarah.
I was remembering way back when Fielding was like the very first online, or still was, but was like going through those growing stages, and we would come like in Kansas to work towards like finishing up that portion for masters. Several of the places required us to go ahead and get an LMLP in order to go ahead and get to work on our practicum hours as we were going through that. I don't know if those are related or not, but I do know in that one case, we had to have that prior to starting a practicum. And I think a lot of times that was because of the way Fielding was set up, where we would do monthly meetings or whatever, but most of it was distance based.
okay. Because like we do have a lot of people who apply for a temporary LMLP to do their internship in a doctoral program. I would have to ask staff if we have people doing it for practicum. I hadn't really thought about that, because if you've already done 60 hours, you probably mostly have done a practicum because they have to have that either way. So I don't know. I'll have to ask staff.
Shall we move up to old business now, Dave?
Okay, that sounds great. And I think probably just in the interest of time, I did prepare some draft questions for a survey. For some of you that are new, in the past, we have worked with the Social Work Advisory Committee, and they've asked for a survey about once every 3 years to look into different topics. That's been really effective. And we've been able to put together some reports based on some of the concerns that were raised by licensees, or some of the effectiveness of, let's say, moving supervision to all online, things like that. And so we thought it would be helpful this year to purchase a tool that would allow us to offer a survey to each of the 7 professions, so that the advisory committees could consider possible questions, and then maybe we could send that out and collect feedback from all licensees in the different areas. So that's sort of where this started. And then at the past meetings, we've started to have a conversation about different questions. So I put together some draft questions. I think last time I may have shared some for the Professional Counseling Advisory Committee as kind of a starting point, but let me show you what I have for you today. You should be able to see a document there with some draft questions. One of the comments we got from some of the advisory committees was that it would be helpful to explain at the beginning why we're asking the questions and why we're trying to collect the information, and then maybe even an estimated time frame to complete the survey. So that way we didn't have people start to answer questions and then give up on the survey. So,
Dave, are you able to make it any bigger?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let me fix that real quick. Okay, I think this should be better. Okay, is that font better?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Okay, so we heard that it would be helpful to kind of explain why the questions were being asked, what information we were collecting, and then time frame. Usually we start off with some demographic questions that helps us to make sure that we got a fair sampling. So we do ask a little bit about in what county or counties someone might practice. That also helps us because we do know that we have some individuals that live outside of Kansas that maintain a license in Kansas. And so asking about counties specifically helps us identify some of the people out of state who may be responding to the survey. But then we ask about, do you work predominantly in an urban area, rural area, or frontier area? And please forgive the numbering, still trying to figure out which of these questions will remain on the final version of the survey, but as a placeholder or possible question now, maybe a question as far as, does someone work in the public sector or do private practice? Do they predominantly work in the educational field or another area? Something along those lines, so that we have an understanding of what type of work the respondents to the survey are doing. And then, since we do have 2 levels of permanent license, maybe to ask as far as which is the highest level of license they have attained in this area. So is it an LMLP or an LCP? And then maybe how many years someone has practiced combined. That way we know, are these long-term practitioners or people who are relatively new to the profession? And then including your LMLP or LCP license in Kansas, how many permanent licenses do you hold in master's level psychology or in that profession combined between all states? There has been some conversation about possible multi-state compacts. So far, Kansas has joined 3 of them. There is one for psychology, and that's the SIPAC compact. But SIPAC is only available for the PhD level of a licensed psychologist. And it's a limited compact. It mostly affects telehealth. But as we explore other possible compacts in the future, it might be helpful to know how many of our licensees hold several licenses in other states. And then maybe a question for the LMLPs only. How many years have you held an LMLP license in Kansas? And then question 7, for individuals who have held an LMLP license in Kansas for at least 2 years, are you taking steps to pursue a licensed clinical psychotherapy license? And if they're not taking steps to pursue an LCP, could they explain why they made that decision or factors that contributed to that decision? We are unique in Kansas in some ways. A lot of states, at least for professional counseling and marriage and family therapy, have 1 level of permanent license, and that's at the clinical level, whereas we have 2 levels for both those professions. And for master's level psychology, we have 2 levels, which is also, from what I hear, unique of the 17 states that license master's level psychology. So it'd be interesting to know, are those individuals that were unable to pass at the 500 level? Are those individuals that attained an LMLP and for another reason they wanted to stay at that level, or was there another issue? I'd be curious to kind of get some feedback on that. And then we've also been trying to tackle the topic of workforce and trying to understand, we have licensee count, but how much direct services are being provided by practitioners? And I don't know about the phrasing of this question, but as a starting point, maybe trying to ask, we know that there are some licensees that work more in an administrative role, or perhaps have a split and do several different things. And so what percentage of their job is actually providing services? And this might be a way for us to have a more educated understanding of, we have a licensee count, but if those individuals are not providing services, how do we gauge the need for practitioners in general to provide some of those direct services? So one possible question could be just to ask them, what percentage of your work involves providing direct services to clients? Number 9, currently no multi-state compact exists for the master's level psychology profession. If one was created under essentially the social work model, where states could now begin to offer not only a single state license, but alternatively a multi-state license, which would allow you to practice in other compact states. Would you be interested in obtaining a license for twice the cost of your traditional license? This is assuming a couple different variables, but it presents a similar model to the social work one, just trying to gauge interest if that was a scenario that was presented. So, number 10, over the past 2 years, based on your observations and experience practicing the master's level psychology profession in Kansas, could you share information on any practice-related issues you have seen, such as areas where practitioners appeared to need more continuing education or training in a certain area? Question 11, over the past 2 years, have you experienced any issues concerning telehealth, either through professional practice or observations of other practitioners? Maybe for question 12, that could be limited to LCPs only. Do you currently provide clinical supervision? And if you do not provide supervision, could you share information on why you don't provide clinical level supervision? Also for the LCPs, if you provide clinical level supervision, what issues have you experienced or observed while providing supervision? And then question 12.2, for the LMLPs only, if you are receiving clinical level supervision, what issues have you experienced or observed while receiving supervision? Question 13, to assist the work of the board, the BSRB has 7 standing subcommittees called advisory committees, which are largely composed of licensees in each of the 7 professions regulated by the board. The advisory committees discuss topics relevant to the work of the board and make recommendations to the board on potential changes to statutes and regulations governing the profession. On a scale of 1 to 10 or 1 to 4, how familiar are you with the work of the Master's Level Psychology Advisory Committee? I think I mentioned we've started to broadcast our meetings on a YouTube channel as of January of 2021, and we do promote that to individuals, but it might be helpful to know, are individuals around the state aware of the work of this committee, and might they benefit from learning more about it? Question 14, do you currently use artificial intelligence in your practice? If you do, in what areas do you use artificial intelligence? And then question 15, as sort of a catch-all, do you have any other comments or feedback you think would be helpful for members of the Master's Level Psychology Advisory Committee of the BSRB to receive when evaluating possible changes to the statutes and regulations for the profession? So any thoughts on these potential survey questions? Tried to take what we had before and also add to it based on what some of the other advisory committees have discussed, and also your feedback from the last meeting.
I think for question 8, it would be worth having a 0 response, like 0, none. The difference between someone who's just not practicing at all and 25%. I think there's some value in knowing that, but everything, the rest of them look good.
That's a very good point. Yeah. We've talked a little bit, as far as workforce, and I've had conversations with the members of the Aging and Disability Services Agency and also Board of Regents and trying to quantify. And it is a fair question, what percentage of licensees are providing services, and then to the ones that do, what percentage of their work is that? And I'm not saying this is perfect because I understand that there could be ways of interpreting the question. You know, you could say, well, I do this as far as direct services, but a certain amount of my work is paperwork, and I wouldn't consider that direct care services. So I'm not sure there's a perfect way to approach this topic, but at least this would be a starting point for us to start to kind of tackle that.
Yeah, I think it's a really valid point because sometimes we will hear they'll say there are this many LSCSWs up in Northwest Kansas, and I know that half of them are in strictly administrative or clinical supervisory positions. So although they hold that level of licensure, to Robert's point, they're not providing any clinical services. So unless you know that, it looks like there's a resource there that there isn't. All right. In the interest of time, as we're rapidly going down, anybody else have any feedback on those? Are we ready to take the next step, or do you want a little more time to look that list over?
I think they're great questions.
We'll explain what the difference is between rural frontier. I mean, I don't know if everybody knows what those words mean, so I just didn't know.
You know, I've debated whether or not to attempt to define it on here. I could potentially say I go with some definition of rural or frontier. I know frontier is a term that not everyone is familiar with, but do you think that would be helpful to add some text on there to kind of describe those terms?
I do, but that's from my perspective.
I don't
Yeah,
know
I
what
think
frontier means.
there's some federal designations that really have to do with the number of people per square mile.
Agreed.
I will do it.
All right. I wanna go ahead, Dave. Looks like you wanted to.
Oh, I'm just gonna say I'll clean this up and then I'll go ahead and see if we can get it sent out. Usually I would leave it open for about 10 days, and we have a targeted way of doing the survey through SurveyMonkey. So we can follow up with just people who didn't respond to the initial notice about it. So I will try to get that put together and sent out, and then hopefully we'll have a report to review at the next meeting.
Great. Thank you very much. Our next meeting is scheduled for October 2nd at 1 p.m. Again, as always, thank you for your participation. Want to give our new members an opportunity to talk a little bit. How did your first meeting go? I mean, you walk right in and we just go straight to work. So
It was very informative. So
I really found being able to access the prior meeting videos was really good too, just to know exactly kind of what you guys have been talking about. And so.
That's good to
okay,
hear.
very good. Well, maybe Dave, that explains why our numbers are so high.
Thank you for going back and watching those. I do agree with you. I think that's really good information, but thanks for taking that step. Yeah.
Yes. Okay, everyone. Again, thank you for your time today, and we'll see you in October. Stay cool and have a wonderful rest of your summer.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank